Well, thanks for everybody that is joining. We have a really big attendance. I really appreciate you taking the time to join us today. On this webinar, you're going to have Craig and Jose going through a few things. Before we start, I wanted to give you a very brief introduction for those of you that might not know us, and then we can get started. My name is Jose Fornell. I'm one of the co-founders of Impact Point. We are focused, as a lot of you know, on the office of the CFO and support private equity portfolio companies in primarily in FP&A and liquidity-related matters. Before I started Impact Point, I spent 10 years at Alvarez & Marsal in the restructuring group. So did a lot of the analytics around cash management and FP&A. And then spent 3 years at the Boston Consulting Group, helping them build their turnaround practice. With that, I'll let Craig introduce himself, and then we'll get started.
Hey, everybody. Thank you again. And echo Jose's comments. Appreciate you guys spending some time with us today. My name is Craig Harworth, a partner with Impact Point, and as Jose said, co-lead the Office of CFO practice with him. I've spent considerable time in the restructuring, turnaround, and transformation areas with Alvarez & Marsal, PwC, and BDO. I've also spent significant time internal in finance leadership organizations, and budgeting is a very near and dear topic to my heart. I've been in charge of budgeting for everything from a $2+ billion public entity to private and private equity held companies on the smaller side. So look forward to covering the materials with you. I'll let Jose get us kicked off, and I'll come back and close us out.
All right. So as you all know, can you see it on your end right now?
Yes.
Okay. As you all know, the topic of today's webinar is how to boost your EBITDA, budgeting for PE-owned companies. So the goals of today, what we're going to be spending some time discussing is what is the importance of budgeting in executing investment thesis and value creation plans. We're going to review some of the key elements of how you can mature your budgeting process in a middle market portfolio company. And then we're going to leave some time towards the end to discuss any questions you might have. As we go through the presentation, you have a Q&A button in the Zoom there. Just feel free to click on that and pose your question, and then we'll get to that at the end of the conversation. So why did we decide to spend some time on this topic today? First of all, obviously, we're all into budgeting season. And then as we work with, with a lot of portfolio companies in the middle market, we have developed over time a really good process for budgeting, right? And those processes are based on different common pain points and essentially how to drive the investment thesis. So what you have on the screen is some of the key things or common themes that we hear from some of you. We have, lacking visibility for strategic decision-making. We have insufficient business insights to drive the value creation plan and investment thesis. There is limited department accountability or support. There is, some of you are going to be new to the private equity world, and you're going to try to set up your budgets to drive to your investment thesis, and you need to know how to get that done and how to execute the investment thesis. We also hear quite a bit that it's very difficult to understand and explain variances to the executive leadership team and the sponsors. And as you know, a lot of you engage in buy and build a strategy will result in multiple acquisitions, and it's just hard to get them integrated into the process. So these are some of the common pain points on that the process we're going to discuss today is designed to address. But the other thing that is also really important as part of this process is what a lot of you, especially a lot of you that are going to be in the FP&A side, are going to have to deal with throughout the whole period of the PE investment. What you're seeing on the screen is essentially how you can think about, where you start when a company is acquired versus where you exit. And, what are some of the ways that, you add value via your EBITDA. right? So you're going to have organic revenue expansion, you're going to have add-ons, you're going to have EBITDA optimization initiatives. But the thing is, as this grows over time throughout the years of the hold period, each of these buckets becomes greater and greater every year, right? And so that budgeting process and how to drive to that investment thesis becomes even more important every year of the hold period. One good way of thinking about it is what I have here in the bottom table. And we have around 6 elements to sort of think about big picture, what is the maturity of the budget. The first one is top down, right? I think most of you, when you're in some of these portfolio companies, already have that top down version done, right? But then there's a few elements that are a little bit tougher and really what we're going to be focusing most of the time. You know, how to get insights from a vendor perspective. A lot of times that year one of the hold period is not yet where it should be, but we think that by year 2, you should start probably getting to that point where you can drive vendor insights. Having initiatives, you know, as part of your budget, clearly defined, you know, with sizing and ownership. You know, we think that, you know, as you progress in the whole in the ownership period, by year 3, you would normally want to have this process matured. Same thing with add-on synergies. You know, by year 3, operating model optimization, that's essentially how you know, what are the key roles and responsibilities within the organization, what is the org structure, and their opportunities there to make that more streamlined. Then the last one is execution uncertainty, right? These basically, the budget doesn't stop in December, right? Only the planning stops. And then you have to focus on how you execute that budget. So those are some of the things that we're going to be discussing today, essentially how you mature that, you know, the budgeting process. What you're seeing in the screen right now is the way that we like to think about budgets, our framework. So on the top side, you're going to see, we think about 3 phases. You know, what is the vision? Phase 2 is driving accountability. Phase 3 is the delivery, right? And what we mean by vision is, here's the deliverable, right? Is your top-down target. Do you know how you're going to set the targets to your teams as to where they're trying to drive to? In terms of accountability, that's more your bottoms-up budget, right? Think about the departments actually having and owning their budgets. And then phase 3 is really that delivery, right? Actually executing on that and maximizing your EBITDA. Now, in order to get there, you need two key items. One is, you know, do you have the right insights for each of those phases? And then what are some of those enablers? And we're going to focus the time on some of these today. So let me just give a brief overview of what these are. For insights for the top-down target, you know, we're thinking about latest trends, your investment thesis, strategic goals. We're going to spend more time, you know, later in the presentation talking about that. Then, in terms of your bottoms up, some of the key insights, you're going to have some around sales and COGS, spend cube, that's really the vendor detail, headcount, and initiatives. And then 2 items that you can think about them more as modular items to the budget. Depends on whether you see that there's opportunities or not. It's basically your add-on integration assessment or synergies and organizational design. Again, is there a way to, you know, to flatten the organization and drive an optimization on how you operate? And then when you are in the phase of executing, the 2 key insights that you got to be able to drive is the variance analysis and generating initiatives to close the gap to budget. As a lot of you already know, right? You get into March, April, and you know, you might be overperforming your budget, might be underperforming. So it's very important that as you're already executing, you have tools to close that gap. Now, the way that you get to these insights and execute the deliverables is via the following enablers. Your budget or work plan, calendar, making sure everybody understands what's coming down the road over the 3-month planning process. Your budget management office, this is essentially the folks that are going to be driving the process. And then, look, a lot of you might already have these, but it's always good and highly recommended to have a rolling forecast for the same reason that, you know, as you get into your budget, things change. You have add-ons, you have things overperform, underperform, and the goal of that rolling forecast is to be able to keep your budget as fresh as possible. And then the final is initiative tracker, right? again, you gotta execute on some key things. How are you gonna track those? Now, today I'm gonna focus on the ones that are highlighted here, which is really the vision side of it, setting your top-down target, everything around your bottoms up, with the exception of sales and COGS. The reason we're not gonna focus on sales and COGS is because depends on the industry you're in, right? Manufacturing is gonna be very different than SaaS, for example, and healthcare. So we're not gonna focus on that, but we're gonna focus more on the cost side. And the only enablers, we're gonna focus on two items, on the calendar and the budget management office. All right, so let's start with the budget management office, how we enable this whole process. You're gonna have essentially 4 teams. You're gonna have your budget management office. This is usually gonna be your CFO, CEO, and your FP&A lead, and they're gonna be driving the process. Your executive sponsors, think about them usually as your executive leadership teams. They are gonna be the folks that actually have several departments reporting to them. And then you have the budget owners. Usually they're gonna be department leads for the most part. And those department leads are gonna be supported by 2 teams, one within the finance team. You might have from some folks from the FP&A department or even accounting in some cases. But then also the ones from that functional support, right? You're doing HR budget, you might actually have a few people within that department tasked with helping you develop the budget. So just to drive a little bit more insights into each of these, right? Your budget and management office, you have 2 types of roles, pre-execution and post-execution. In terms of your pre-execution, they're responsible for really driving the vision. You're providing feedback to the budget owners, setting up the meetings, driving the cadence. They're really the energy behind the budget. And then post-execution, how do they identify the gaps to budget? Setting up a process to track actual versus budget, supporting initiatives and how they get implemented. And one of the main things throughout is just driving issue resolution. Your executive sponsors, again, these are usually going to be your executive leadership teams. They're going to be providing the guidance to the budget owners. They're going to be approving the departmental budgets, and they're going to drive the identification and inclusion of key initiatives. Then your budget owners here, they're going to be the ones on the day-to-day basis responsible to develop the budget on a timely basis. They're going to be the ones that are going to be responsible for populating the actual templates, and actually doing some of the site analysis that need to be done. And then your support teams, as I said, right, finance and the departmental support teams, they're basically going to be there to provide additional detail to the budget owners, data. Maybe some of them are going to have access to certain systems that are critical to develop the budget. So that was in terms of the teams and the roles. Let me talk very briefly around how we think about usually the calendar. So from a meeting perspective, essentially, usually the budget is going to take 3 months of hardcore planning, and then there's that 4th month where you're just closing a few items. You're getting feedback from the boards, you're getting some of that kind of stuff, which is why you see 4 months. And the way that I like to think about it, if you look at the left-hand side here, is month 1, have a budget kickoff, bring everybody that's part of the process in, not just the senior folks. You want everybody of those functional support teams as well, so they know what's coming down the line. They understand what the expectations are going to be from each of them. You're going to have a meeting to align on the target that you're going to set for the budget. On month 2, you start your bottoms-up kickoff. That's basically having individual sessions with your departmental leads to help them understand the templates, and then align on how certain line items are going to be budgeted. You're also going to have throughout this time period two reviews with them on the budget and provide guidance. So how they're doing with the budget, what is the first iteration? Then you provide certain feedback, and then they come up with a second and hopefully final iteration. Then probably you're going to have 2 reviews in that month 3 and 4, with the board. Then the last thing I'll say is, throughout the engagement, I highly recommend to have weekly PMO status updates. That's a budget management office. And this is really to make sure that when people have issues, those are coming up as part of the conversation, and everybody knows what the issues are, and there's something that can be done about it. Let's start moving to the insights aspect, right? So we just covered the enablers. Again, that's the budget management office and the calendar. Let me spend some time focusing on how to set up the target. So normally we look at 3 different elements to identify what the right target should be. The first is your latest trends. Usually we leverage a rolling forecast if you have that, but basically look at your historicals. And what we do from there is we normalize for one-time items, any kind of non-recurring revenue or expenses, things that you expect to change, basically normalize that from your historicals. And then based on the trend, where are you headed, right? So that's one input into setting your targets. Input number 2 is your investment thesis, right? Work with the deal teams to understand what expectations they have, and then adjust those expectations to things such as, maybe you have recently executed add-ons or add-ons that are going to come down the pipeline before the budget process is over. Are there any personal investments that need to happen? Any existing initiatives that are not incorporated as part of that investment thesis? Are there any changes to the run rates? Any kind of budget goals, right? So basically take that investment thesis and adjust it for the things are coming that are different from that investment thesis. And then finally, set up, get a good understanding of your strategic goals. So these are your key objectives for the next year, and then with that, help identify what are the major, you're not going to know everything when you're setting your target, right? But are there any major items that are going to change? Maybe you already know that there's going to be some hires. Maybe there's some processes or systems that are going to be implemented that are going to change your cost structure. Right. So what are some of those things, and use that to begin defining some of the initiatives. All of these 3 items help you start aligning what the target should be. And again, the target is the target. It's not the final budget number. The goal is to be able to provide feedback to the teams, and then when you consolidate that budget from everybody else, the bottoms up budgets from the departments, those do that roll up makes sense when you compare it to your targets. That's the goal. Let's move on to the bottoms up budget and what are some of the key insights here. And then as part of this section, we're going to dive in deeper into spend cube, headcount, and initiatives. But I'd like to think about in the following, right? It's 3 core things for your expenses side of the bottoms up budget. One is prepare a spend cube. If you haven't prepared a spend cube before, but basically what it basically is having all your data around where you spend your where the expenses are coming from a cost center perspective, business unit, and at the vendor level. Right, we're going to talk about that in a couple of slides. Usually, I do this to identify vendors that reflect 80% of the spend and that are volatile in nature, that you got to address and really spend more time thinking about in the budgeting process. But then as you're going through that, you're going to find, insights that maybe lead you to, are there opportunities to optimize your budget, to cut some of those costs, and also it's going to allow you to plan at the vendor level. Okay. Headcount, usually run an HRIS file from there and make sure you're incorporating all the employees by department, and then go through the process of identifying who are the new hires that might be coming up and where is that headcount or costs related to that headcount. How are they going to change, right? So you might have some cost of living adjustments, that's COLA here, promotions, benefits that are going to be adjusted. And then finally, initiatives, find some, as you're going, especially through your spend cube and headcount, you're going to start to identify opportunities around your key vendors, headcounts. Maybe there's some organizational design, add-ons that can be further integrated. And then what you do with that is, once you have an idea of what those initiatives might be, you set about to pick the most important ones and you size them. You assign an owner to size these initiatives. and you start adjusting the forecast relative to reflect the size and the timing of when those initiatives are going to be. So with that, I'm going to spend some time just driving into these in a bit more detail. The first one, I just want to show you a picture of what I mean by a bottoms-up headcount budget, right? A lot of you already do this probably, and you're very familiar. But it's literally setting up all of the folks that are going to be part of that budget. Maybe there's a future hire like this one here. You said when they're going to start. You also calculate what the bonuses might be. You can use historicals or you can use a bonus plan, but basically set up the bottoms up by department and give that to the department leads. Now let's dive into the spend cube aspect. Like I said, the spend cube is really your spend data at the cost center level by vendor by department, right? And the goal is to review spending patterns by key vendor. This is going to help you set up your baseline forecast or budget. Based on these numbers, you're going to be able to say, hey, this is the minimum or the what we've seen over the last year or so. So that might help you set up your baseline. But then it's also help you determine your savings opportunities. These is some of the things that they're key about the spend cube. It helps identify things such as, are there any spend that is that you lack you don't have spend authority. Are there numerous vendors providing the same or similar products and opportunities essentially to consolidate? Things that you identify through that as well are like visibility. Maybe you have difficulty in identifying some vendors, but with a spend cube, you're going to be able to see that in more detail. You're probably going to start identifying where you have lack of controls and processes. Where you might have no standardization. And one of the key things they're going to see here, and I've seen it multiple times, is you pull this together, you give it to the departments, and it's like, well, I don't know who this vendor is. Or maybe sometimes you have a tech or software kind of provider and you start questioning, do we need all of those services from them? Can we trim it down? Right. But then, that gives you a question, right, around can we improve on the delegation of authority so that the right vendors and the right spend is approved? And as you start going through that, right, that vendor spend, you're going to start finding some levers, to drive savings in your budget, such as, can you find some discretionary spend that you can take out? Negotiate with suppliers. Two perspectives that you can think about here, big picture. Any opportunities to reduce price around consolidating suppliers, starting RFPs or competitive bidding, consolidating volume. Maybe change the terms as well. Increase the contract length or decrease the contract length. Get some rebates. Find opportunities to revise the purchase order process. Develop new controls and compliance to the process, and develop controls to the purchasing organization. By the way, on these we have a few levers that we are happy to share as well. If you reach out to us, this is just a snapshot, but happy to share some additional things that you can think of as you do your vendor analysis. And then, like I said before, the initiative charters, basically one of the things that we like to do, and these, you don't have to follow these exact template, but I wanted to show you something so you kind of understand where we're coming from here. But if you find some big picture initiatives, big items that you truly want to create ownership around and be able to drive them, we like to create these type of templates where you actually codify what the initiative is, what is the baseline spend on that initiative? Are there any kind of one-time investments? What are the kind of activities that you need to build up there? Maybe there's some milestones that you need to build up. Again, describe your one-time costs and any risks, dependencies, and obstacles, right? And this basically what gets approved as well as part of your budget, and eventually is what would get tracked when you're executing in your budget. And the last slide I'll cover before I turn it over to Craig, I want to just show you these is a few different ways of thinking about your bottoms up modeling techniques, right? We discussed vendors, so I wanted to put these in context. You don't need to necessarily always have or budget every single line item at the vendor level. But there's different techniques that you can pull together to give to your budget owners, again, to those departments. And I like to think about usually about 4 different techniques. One is vendor level. I usually choose these. So you're gonna have something that looks like this, right? You're gonna have vendor 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And you're gonna have how much you're budgeting, and you might even have what the prior year spend was. I usually use these for situations where there is really large vendors, volatile line items such as professional fees or marketing agencies, insurance, that you're picking up new insurance policies, you're consolidating them, memberships, projects. These are the kind of situations where I actually leverage that spend cube for your budgeting at the vendor level. But obviously, not everything has to be done at the vendor level in your budget, right? Some others could be with, thinking about it from a direct relationship perspective, right? The simplest one is payroll taxes. Usually very steady, right? So, that's one of the techniques to forecasting that, just what is the percentage. Another one is just growth rate. So I usually use these for very stable line items. For example, rent in this particular example, right? Maybe there's one time in the year where rent is usually increased, right, for a particular facility. So I would go with something as simple as this. And then the last one is more like metrics and KPIs type of situations, right? So where you might have like, hey, what is my revenue per subscriber? What is the number of subscribers, and what is the total revenue? So these are usually the 4 techniques that I like to set up in the budget templates for the departments. But again, like the vendor analysis is really powerful for you to get to the right insights as to where you could consolidate spend, drive down costs. But again, focus usually on those when you have large OpEx vendors, volatile line items, etc. With that, I'll turn it over to Craig for for the integration assessment and a bit more on the org side of the budgeting process.
Yeah, thank you, Jose. And just wanted to spend a little bit of time on 2 areas that I think don't always get reviewed during the budget process. And the budget timing is a perfect opportunity to do some deep dives and really unlock some additional value creation here. So as we think about the strategy of the buy and build, and that's predicated on doing a number of acquisitions in addition to organic growth. But as you go through your acquisition process and you bring in 1 and 2 and 5 and 10 acquisitions, are you always integrating them effectively at closing or soon thereafter? So while one acquisition not integrated may not be extremely impactful, once you get to that more material level of a number not being integrated, it can cause some very significant issues around redundant or duplicative systems, people, processes, facilities. And I'll talk a little bit about the people aspect of it here in a minute. But this is really an opportunity for you to take a step back and say, what is that ideal end state that we want to be looking at? And so what you see outlined here is a quick hit assessment that allows you to go through and figure out, where are the gaps to that end state? So it's about a 2-week assessment. And you see at the top hand side of the slide there, the pieces, the steps that you go through to get to a red flag report. And just kind of going left to right, some key items as you initiate the project. It's really aligning with your management teams on what that desired end state for an operating model should look like. And it's we want back office fully integrated. Does it make sense to integrate sales and some of the business units, or is it a full integration? So once you have that alignment, it's starting to dive into where are we right now, and thereby identifying those gaps. And so as you work through those processes, you end up over on the right-hand side here with the delivery. And it's a red flag report. But as you go through that red flag, you see those opportunities being outlined on how you can close that gap, and it should provide you that roadmap for realizing some cost savings and in the synergies as you're removing those systems, as it's being really well integrated. And this is really important at the end of the day, because as you think about going to your next turn in your exit transaction, those well-defined, clear operating models that are integrated are the ones that get the highest value realizations and the highest multiples. So again, this is something that can be a quick hit assessment, really identify where those gaps are, and a roadmap to remediation. So we go forward to the org piece of it. So as we think about org design, I think a lot of people historically think of org design as, process mapping, workflows, how do things get done vis-a-vis the people that are in the seats and the existing structures. And we take a little bit different approach to org design. And just a little bit of background, as you see the left and right-hand side here for pre-org design and post-design. As you look at layers in the organization, you have 9 layers on the left-hand side, bringing it to 7 layers on the right-hand side. And it's really going from that diamond shape to a pyramid. And by doing that, you really simplify the organization. There's clarity around what that operating model looks like. And clarity, it's important for how the work gets done, how the executive team is able to drive strategy through the organization. But there's also quite a bit of benefit to the people, the talent you have in the organization as well, as they understand what their roles and responsibilities are, what their clear reporting relationships are, what they're going to be measured on and expected to drive. And so you see those 3 key benefits as you move from left to right around simplification, clarity, and value creation. And by pulling those levers or design principles, that value creation is really a result of the process. And so if you go through, you reduce your layers, you increase your spans and control, you look at geographic mix, that has a effect of driving cost savings, which you then apply to your multiple value to get to an increase in your enterprise value. As you think about those levers at the bottom of the page here, the way we approach this is to really use those levers as design principles. And so, if you think about layers, and we say, no organization below X number of people can be more than 4 layers. You then go in and apply that design principle to the organization or the department. You shrink that organization, and it also becomes a guiding principle going forward as you revisit those design principles from time to time. And I think one key call out for me is the geographic mix piece of it. We all deal with very tight constraints as far as being able to spend on human resources. And so what we don't see utilized optimally is the geographic mix piece of it. Whereas if you can, go to a geographic center, get talent, and spend, a half, a third, a quarter per person, are you able to leverage those facilities and those capabilities more? So really that's the process here. Let me take you through a sample calendar. And this is based on an engagement we delivered recently. This is a full engagement. I'll talk a little bit more here in a second, but similar to the spin cube, similar to the integration assessment, we can also do a quick hit org design assessment that's 2 weeks. Let's look at where you are, what those opportunities are to move from a disorganized, inefficient to a healthy, well-designed, fit for growth type organization. But what you see on this slide is a full process. And you'll note that this is about 12 weeks. As I talked about that old process, the historical way of looking at it as process flows, workflows, that can be a 6 to 8 month type of project. Whereas by doing this metric-driven, principle-guided design, we're generally able to deliver these types of reviews and projects within 6 to 12 weeks. And really just want to hit quickly on the phases. This is done via a sprint approach. So really before the first sprint, we spend some time pulling the HRIS data, coming up with what the baseline looks like, agreeing with finance and HR. We then push into the first sprint. And those lighter blue boxes, the first and second sprint, are really where you're designing the organization. We'd like to see 75 to 80% of the design work done in the first sprint, and then really the around the edges, the final pieces come in that second sprint. And those other intermediate pieces, the staffing for prep and implementation in the middle and the end, are really the check-ins with the steering committee, the CEO, update on progress, and get confirmation around buy-in on the design. And you see the key activities there in the middle of the page, and the bottom of the page are those key meetings. So similar to a budget management office, we would set up a PMO, have stand-up meetings with an internal PMO. We push the project as well and facilitate. And then we have those regular meetings with the CEO and the steering committee. So going on to the final slide, Jose.
Yeah.
So again, I really appreciate everybody's time and joining us today. If there are questions, feel free to put those in the chat function here in the meeting, and we will get to those here momentarily. The middle section here, we just want to call out, Impact Point, we really value long-term relationships, and we try to set up those long-term relationships versus being transactional. Jose and I, any of our team, are happy to do sessions with you. There's not a need for a project. If you want to brainstorm with us, if you're looking for templates, playbooks, if you want us to do a quick hit assessment of what your current budget looks like, or look at the efficiency and accuracy of your budgets, if you just want to brainstorm, we're here. We're happy to have some time with you, do those quick hit assessments and let you know what we see or give you some of our advice. So, you see our contact information there at the bottom. Feel free to reach out to any of us. Happy to spend some time with you and just talk things through and hopefully develop those longer term relationships. So with that,
Just to add one more thing, just to make sure we clarify it to everybody in the call. The last two topics that we discussed, that add-on integration and the org portion, we again see it more as a modular item, right? It's more like if you need it, you should incorporate as part of that year's budgeting. But it shouldn't be always part of your budget. Everything else, the spend cube, the headcount, all the initiatives, all of that stuff that I covered, I think is an absolute must as you mature your budget. And then these other last two items that Craig mentioned, right, is more, do you see an opportunity in your org? Do you see an opportunity to further integrate those add-ons? That's when you drive that playbook. Right.
Yep. Perfect. Thank you for clarifying, Jose. So again, thank you for your time. Appreciate you joining us. This will be available and distributed, the recording as well. So with that, happy to take any questions that have come in, and I believe Maggie is going to help us facilitate those.
Yeah, so as we're waiting for other questions to come in, maybe it'd be helpful if you guys talk about how you would budget or plan to budget for potential acquisitions.
Sure. Jose, do you want to take that, or you want me to?
It's okay either way, Craig.
Okay. I'll tell you how I've typically done that, and then Jose, you can talk about your experience. But what I do is typically, as Jose talked about, the investment thesis and expected growth rates, the acquisitions, if sort of known, expected, those get incorporated to the budget. But if they are you have a target of X dollars of revenue and EBITDA, that becomes part of the top down, but they're separate. So the execution piece as far as the baseline model, and then as you go to execute on your growth and acquisition plans, you start measuring those throughout the year against that top down piece.
Great. Jose, anything to add? And if not, we can go ahead and move to a
No,
next.
I think that was spot on. I think it's if you know which ones are coming, budget for them, and if not, I would take them off. I mean, I think you can put a target as to what you want to do, but I wouldn't tie your budget necessarily exactly to a target, because you just never know. You need to have one without for sure.
Makes sense. Another common question I think we see is how would you think about different scenarios and or versions of a budget? Meaning, do you have, a different budget for management, for business, and an executive version or a board version, or you just kind of keep to one?
Yeah, I think I'll take this one, Craig. Look, I think I usually like to think about two budgets. One is your stretch budget that's going to have some of the more complicated initiatives, and that's the one that you're going to drive internally in your within the organization, what you're going to drive towards. But then I do like to also have in many situations a budget that is what you're going to be presenting to the lenders, for example, right? Something that's a bit more conservative. So that's how I think about it. But internally, I always like to have a budget that's kind of more of a stretch budget that you push the organization towards driving significant value. But understand what the risks are and what the downsides are.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think that the higher budget is what you have to implement and have as part of the buy-in for the organization and what people are held accountable to. And to a point Jose made earlier in the presentation, it's also understanding before you get to the need for them, what those levers are for potential remediation. And so if you start to fall behind, we know that we have X, Y, and Z that we can go leverage in order to close those gaps. But I think you do have to have the one budget that people are expected to deliver on, driven down into the organization.
That makes sense. And moving just kind of right along, what are the types of initiatives that you would typically include in your models?
Greg, you want to take these or do you want me to take?
Yeah, go ahead.
So type of initiatives, again, I would split into two, right? It's more of a vendor type of initiatives and more people type of initiatives, right? It's super high level, big picture, because you gotta drive them separately. But then within those, right, it's gonna depend on where you're driving. You might have some around consolidated vendors, as we have discussed in the past. But it's gonna be on a case by case basis. But I usually like to think about those two at a very high level, and then you gotta see like what the opportunities are. I don't know, Craig, if you have anything to add to that.
The one thing I would add is also force ranking them. So you're going to have some initiatives that are, I'm not going to say easy, but they are easier, and then the ones that become more draconian are further down the list. So I like to go through and have that understanding of where are the different levers I can pull, and then sort of the level of pain that each of those levers would bring to the organization.
Okay, great. I think we'll have time for maybe one or two more questions. So, how often do you recommend updating a rolling forecast? And would you do that as a top-down, bottom-up, or a combination?
So, normally I would recommend at least once a quarter. Preferably you get to a position where it's simple enough and quick enough to update a rolling forecast once a month. And it is more top down. Now, that doesn't mean that if you have some specific items that you need to consult or work with other departments or other folks within the organization, you absolutely should, right? But usually it's a bit more top down. You consult on certain things. But I highly always recommend to do it at least once a quarter, if not once a month. Look, things change. Everybody in this call has probably gone through these. You get to March and April and things start changing. So understanding your gap to budget early on is very, very important, because that allows you to start coming up with new initiatives to close those gaps, or have a way of actually analyzing and explaining the variances and why things might be different this time. I think we also have one more question here. Have you recommended any industry best budgeting or FP&A softwares, or have you seen the process work best in Excel models? Look, I think I have never seen, especially in the middle market, I have never seen a budget that works without any Excel at all. Certainly, I think it's better to use different FP&A softwares to do it. But you always need, if you think about it, if you take a step back, there's always certain calculations, certain math that you need to do in Excel that you cannot do in some of those systems, right? Now, those systems are great to consolidate and share information, right? So, for example, I might actually have the revenue budget partially done in Excel, but you upload it into some of these tools. And then that gives information to some other folks that need the revenue number, right? So I think in terms of collaborating and consolidating, fantastic. But there's always little things that you have to do outside that those systems don't have the capabilities. I don't know, Craig, if you have a different opinion on that.
Yeah, very, very similar commentary. I also think that as you're setting up those systems, a lot of time it's the framework from Excel that then drives how it's implemented into the software. And so to Jose's points, a lot of the components, the drivers of it are best facilitated via Excel. And I know a lot of them now will actually spit out Excel templates that you can then populate, drive the information, and then re-upload. And that's a feature in a number of those types of software. So I don't think you can fully get away from Excel, and just also dependent upon how your organization and the budget owners participate, they also may be much more comfortable in Excel as well.
I think we're a bit past time, but if there's any other questions, happy to stay here for another minute, another 5 minutes or so. So I'll probably stay on, but really appreciate everybody attending. And like we said, reach out to us if you have any questions, any help with templates, playbooks. We're always happy to help. Like Craig said, we're not transactional in nature. We would love to just sometimes be able to jump on a call and support you with questions. So feel free to reach out, and we'll share some of these materials, after this call as well.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. Appreciate everybody coming on, and look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, everybody.